listening, and welcome to another developer interview here for the Perceptive Podcast series on game wisdom. For tonight, we have another guest from the tabletop RPG side of things, who reached out and was interested in coming on to chat about it, and of course, any other RPG-related stuff that comes to mind. So, please welcome the designer from Innocent Goblin, Michael. So, how are you doing tonight?
I'm very good, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, not at
How are you
all.
doing?
It was a pleasure to meet you, and thank you for reaching out about wanting to come on for these talks.
I was kind of told about you from a friend of mine who is either a friend of yours or has listened to listened to it before, so told me to come along and.
Yep. And as I was telling Michael, I'm always interested in guests, so feel free to reach out. I'm always happy to chat with you about game design or about an upcoming project. So, like I said, it is great to meet you. We are once again on those lovely time zones. I think you are based out of Australia, you said, or
UK.
UK. I'm sorry. I had developed from Australia previously, so always fun with the multi-hour time zone differences.
Yeah, I think I'm a good 5 hours ahead, which is fun for planning.
Yes, I'm definitely aware of that, especially for people listening. Know that we've definitely had some fun with planning these things out. But again, thank you so much for contacting me, and I'm sure this will be another great conversation. So, to get the ball rolling with, since it's your first time on, could you talk a little bit about who you are and what is your background when it comes to game dev?
Yeah, I am Michael. I write under and publish games under the name Innocent Goblin. I started around 2018 in the kind of D&D sphere, writing homebrew one-shots and different classes and things for the game. And then very quickly started moving on to my own stuff, mostly weird fan games of shows I liked at the time, and then branching out into more my own things. I've run 2 different crowdfunding campaigns to fully make some of the games I've made. I think overall I've made something along the line of 40 to 50 projects that I've released, and throughout that actually overly prolific way too much stuff, I've also released 2 fully made games which I've been able to fully sell and send out to people as physical products, which has been amazing.
So, with the tabletop games that you developed, I was looking at your itch page for it, so I can see your older titles are built off of D&D rules and so on. For your newer modules, your newer stories, are they using the same kind of rule set or design, or a different system?
I've branched out for. It was only very briefly I was running on the D&D, so after a while I quickly moved on to running basically writing my own systems and running from that. I use a lot of my games are solo based, and I use a lot of tarot cards for kind of the construction of rules. And then I've also created a few other systems which I've been using to design my kind of more co-op games. So I'm very interested in the creation of the systems away from the more more typical traditional gaming, which I know a lot of people do really enjoy, and it's definitely fun and it's got its place. But I do like a weird system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I guess that is a really good place to start with some of these questions then. So from a design standpoint, when a lot of people, including myself, think about tabletop RPGs and the tabletop design, we think of again D&D, the one from Vampire the Masquerade. We kind of think of established rule sets and systems like that. Now, I have spoken with previous tabletop designers who have created their own systems and their own rules. So, I guess the first question I want to ask you then is what is it like, or what's the process for thinking about the mechanics and the systems that you want to develop for one of your modules or one of your stories?
I think the first thing to think of is what is the key aspect of the of that game you want to create to turn into a mechanic. So if it's the vibe of the game, or do you want it to be particularly dangerous, or do you want to For example, the first project I made was a Steven Universe, unofficial Steven Universe fan game, and the one thing I wanted to make sure was right, even if the rest of the game was a bit naff, the one thing that had to be right was the ability to fuse, and that needed to feel correct. So the first thing you really need to think about is, what is the core part of this game, and how can I make it feel good while you're playing it? And then from there, the rest of the game should fold into place quite happily.
And with like the games on your storage, you have of course single player, you have like multiplayer. Does having like one, two, or multiple players like change or impact your thought process when you're creating the rules?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. The solo games they can do so much more in terms of the emotional impact of playing the game in a way that you can't. Well, you can do with multiplayer games, but you probably shouldn't.
Hmm.
So, you can add a lot more emotion into the mechanics in a way that you can't with. Again, you can, but it doesn't necessarily always come out as well. So, for a game I wrote called Pirouettes, it's a solo game about a ballet dancer performing for an eldritch horror. And the more you perform, the more exhausted you become, and the more likely you will fall, and the horror will get you. And the one thing I wanted was that fear, the slowly, well, not even slowly, the quite rapidly approaching death that you might have. I wanted I wanted the game to feel futile, like you were never going to manage to make it out, even though you could. There's just that doubt in your mind, and I did it through something which has been really useful for a lot of solo game design, which is Jenga towers, where you begin to take more and more blocks off the tower, and when it collapses, something bad happens. Now, that does work for multiplayer games as well. A game called, I think it's Dread, uses it, and it is a wonderfully tense game. But in that solo, where you are moving it, if you get it wrong, you're the only one that's going to get kind of the downside of it, and for some reason it adds so much to the tension of the game. But with multiplayer games, I think you can kind of step back from the emotion of it and think more about the actual experience of playing it, if that makes sense, and how all the mechanics will mesh together, because that's where I think a lot of fun of co-op games come from.
Yeah, and I'm looking at like the different stories that you have on the itch page, and yeah, there's the whole lot of variety in terms of kind of like the mood and the aesthetic that you're trying to get across. And like when we talk about things from like a video game perspective, like when we look at like the aesthetic of a game, we're talking about, of course, the art style, the feel of it, and that kind of respect. From a tabletop standpoint, are there any other aspects in terms of like getting like that aesthetic or the feel of what you want, like the story or your own rules to convey?
Oh yeah, how you write a game will massively impact how it feels, but also how the game looks. So, I mean, to be fair, most people can set aside the aesthetic of a game, but it's kind of similar to video games. Like I said, the aesthetic of it and the visual design massively changes how you look at a game. And it's the same with tabletop games as well. If you need that, it doesn't necessarily have to be like perfect, hundreds of pounds spent on like really good graphic design, but getting that right vibe really helps. Again, I'm going to bring up Pirouettes, but we found my page designer found this like phenomenal collection of public domain artworks from an artist that created surreal, creepy ballet paintings. And the game feels so much more unhinged and kind of abstract and surreal than it would have if it was just black with white text, which probably what I was going to have to do if I didn't get it funded. But alternatively, I made a game called Grotty Gobbo's Tea Grotto, which is a game where you play as a goblin building a little tea company and running a little community of like fellow tea lovers. It's a very cutesy game. It's a very fun little sweet game. But we got art from an amazing artist called Rossi Does Drawings, and like their goblin drawings are the most wholesome looking goblins in the world. Absolute perfection for that kind of game, and without it wouldn't hit that vibe. And similarly, we went to a poet called the Goblin Poet and got him to write a ton of like little poems for the game, and that addition just adds to the game a lot more, just adding to it, so it's not just the rules of the game that you're looking at.
And going back to something that you said a minute ago regarding like Perret and like having like this sense that you're going to lose, that it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. I want to kind of like, I guess like build off of that for a minute. With like talking about a game like that, like from my own perspective, I can of course look at roguelikes and even just like the horror genre in general. There are plenty of games out there where it's not about winning, it's about kind of losing the lease at the end of the day. So I want to kind of like, I guess like pose to you, or how do you, or like what's it like creating like a rule set or designing a game around the fact that you expect the player to lose? Because typically when we look at, again, most video games, they're supposed to be, you know, you win or you lose. But when you're explicitly designing around this, you know, incoming or oncoming dread of failure, it probably creates like a very different like feel to things.
Oh yeah, I think it's important first that they know, like, people know that the game is not going to be winnable from the start, because I think that adds to it. I think going into a game and then finding out that it's 20 times harder than you thought it was going to be. As someone that absolutely sucks at video games as much as I love them, that's my life. Going into a game and being like, okay, this is so much harder than I thought it was going to be. But knowing, it's like the Dark Souls mentality almost, is like, you know you're going to have a torturous time getting through the entire game, but it kind of adds to it. And in the same way for horror games, where it's, if you know your character is going to die at the end, or very likely might, but know that isn't a failure, then as long as the story and the journey to that failure, like that ending, is worth it, then the game won't feel like a waste of time. That's why a lot of like really kind of difficult and games, like a lot of solo games, have that vibe where like you won't succeed. I know quite a few. Wretched and Alone is a game system that kind of does a similar thing, where it's like you can succeed at the game, but you're very unlikely to. And every game that uses that system well does so in a way that's like, the journey is an emotional one. You build up to it, and you know when your character finally ends, that's their perfect place, even if they could have succeeded.
It kind of reminds me, as you're describing it, of like games like The Darkest Dungeon. That, again, like I think The Darkest Dungeon was the first time I saw a game explicitly say before you start, this is a very hard game. You are more than likely going to die and lose all your characters in the process. And it is that kind of challenge, not just in like tabletop and video games in general, when you have like games meant to be on that very harder side. I can also think of stuff like the kind of like arcade like score chasing genre, where you're not supposed to win a game like Devil Daggers. You are supposed to eke out every millisecond more of time and high score if you want to prove that you're the best. And I think it does create a very different mentality, or a very different like goal for the player. Like for myself personally, I've never got attracted to like arcade like chasing style games. For me, it's always been about kind of like getting to the end, or solving what the game wants me to do, and then once it's done, I can move on to the next game in my infinite backlog. But there is definitely that appeal for people who like the level of like refinement or optimization. Okay, I got 800 points, or I got 7 pages in. Let me go for 8. Let me go for 9, and rinse and repeat.
A game has to be very kind of addictive to me to play it when there's no end point or anything. And as much, I'm not very good at the whole creating the perfect meta in a game. So watching people like RT Game do it, where like his pure luck just makes him succeed at everything he does, and he ends up getting like just like watching him play Balatro, and he gets the infinite points. And I actually created I created a mode called just exhaustion mode, where the chance of winning is gone. You can't finish the routine. You only finish when you've fallen. And the idea is like see how pure your luck can get you there. And I don't think anyone has played it further than like what they would have managed in the normal game. But it's I think for those kind of games, like I said, because it is the journey that leads you up, and what kind of separates a solo experience in a tabletop game and a solo experience in a like a standard video game that isn't designed for pure story journey, is that solo tabletop games by design have that hook in it, where you have to like who you're playing as and the story of your character, because you've created them and you've kind of had to pour in that energy into them. So even when they eventually fall, even if it was by design, it still hurts that a little bit.
Yeah. I think like from my own perspective, like games that I've seen that have done that would be any game that lets you have like your own custom characters, or even if it's something as simple as like an XCOM, like where you can name your characters after your best friends, neighbors, enemies, whoever, and of course watch them miss that 75% chance to hit. And I mean, the act of I guess like instilling more in these characters has been around for a very long time. We can of course talk about the original D&D. We can even talk about people who made like some brilliant after action reports from pick any like strategy or RPG style game. That there is definitely like that love of connecting between these characters beyond just here's just a super generic guy that there's like nothing to go with it.
Yeah, I mean it's you often see with games where it depends on the game, but like often there's the games you don't know anything about the person you're playing for the story. I know I have this a lot with Fallout. As much as I love Fallout, it always gets to the point where like the dialogue options come in, and there's no option for just like not playing along in the scenario how I would do it. And like that could be quite frustrating to it. And then you get games what was that D&D game that came out recently?
Baldur's Gate.
Baldur's Gate. No, you get the games like Baldur's Gate where they've thought of every possible thing to a frankly absurd amount. And you definitely, there's a reason why so many people have kind of fallen in love with the characters you can play there, because they feel like they've set that character up exactly how they want to, even if in actual process you haven't set it up that much. You're still playing under the guides of what you have in front of you.
And looking at the list of like solo games that you definitely have quite an interesting mix of like different stories and different designs. And I guess like that is, I think, a very interesting point about kind of like the tabletop RPG genre, that there definitely is like room to create a variety of mechanics. And I kind of want to get your thoughts on like that aspect, because again, like from a tabletop standpoint, at like the basic level, you need figures on a board or even just a pen and paper to make something. But like from your own perspective with like designing, what is it like, I guess, creating like very interesting or very varied rules and stories from each one of your games?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it can start from an idea of like, I want to make a game about this specific thing, or you have a weird idea for a mechanic and you have to then try and make a game around it. But for a lot of them, once you have an idea of the very specific thing you want to write about, coming up with a mechanic that feels like it fits the vibe and fits like a physical thing that you're doing outside of just the imagining that you're doing can be quite an exciting thing. I have one game called 150 meters, which is in reference to the tidal waves that came from after the Fear and Eruption. So Bronze Age Cretes. The idea is you play a Minoan during this time period, before, during, and after. You build up relationships with people, build up your life, and then the eruption hits, and a lot of your life is kind of literally washed away. And it's played with post-it notes. So you're writing down all these different connections. And then when you've hit the stage where the volcanic eruption happens, the rules say you're supposed to burn the notes of the people that die. I then added a thing being like, please don't actually do that. That's I don't be responsible for a wildfire, you know. But like coming up with a thing for you to do. I like that sometimes games, they tell you to do something, but at no point should be taken literally. There's a game called Horsescale, which is a solo game that I won't actually go into, but the mechanics of it is you're supposed to draw lines and parts of yourself that your character is losing as they like go through multiple surgeries. And it's a horrifically impactful game that I don't know if many people have actually played a full game of, but is like highly regarded. And it's those kind of games that I really like. The nigh on unplayable for all the best reasons kind of games. I have one game called The Kaiju Love You, which entirely started from the idea that I wanted bubble wrap as a battle map. And I had the mechanic of popping bubbles in the bubble wrap to show devastation zones. And I came up with the idea of the game where you play as a kaiju fighting other kaiju on a nameless city, and as you're walking through the city, you're destroying buildings. So you pop the bubbles, and part of the game is trying to navigate through the city without trying to destroy as little buildings as you can, as you're kind of fighting these more malicious kaiju, I guess. And then I threw in a random romance part of the game because I thought it'd be funny, because the pun of The Kaiju Love You was too good. But yeah, there's a lot of fun coming up with that odd mechanic that kind of fits the vibe, especially for solo games where they really fit having weirder mechanics come through.
And I think like one thing that's like very interesting, it just says that building a tabletop game around using bubble wrap as one of the mechanics. And like looking at some of the other stories that you develop, you have some that require Arcana tarot card decks, so pen and paper. I think one you said involves you can have a Jenga tower that you can also set up. And I guess like with the physicality of like a tabletop experience, what is the process, or like how do you come up with like I guess like the physical aspect of playing these games or playing your games?
I mean, for tarot cards, I just really love them. I think they add such a big dimension. Aesthetically, I really enjoy them, but also in terms of games, they add a dimension of something that playing cards can do, but they don't have the kind of built-in implications that tarot cards do. So you they're a bit of a easy, I was going to say cheat, but they're not really a cheat. But if you're making a game and you need prompts, if you use tarot cards, they've got themes built in. So prompts become very easy to write. So you can very quickly, or you can just have them as their themes. So you can flip a card and be like, oh, your character is feeling themes of, let's say it's the death cards, what's happening to them next is the theme of endings and new beginnings and, metamorphosis. So you can very easily use them. but they also have the tactile nature of flipping over tarot cards and feeling like they're determining the future as they play. For I think there's a couple of very common items used. Jenga towers are getting quite big now for solo games, especially after Wretched and Lone, because that system uses it so well. Because it just adds that fear, and you can see it coming. Like, just every time you do an action and you've messed up and you have to use the tower, you're likely about to cause the end of the character. I even saw someone used the sticky lizards, things you get from the wall and they slowly peel off.
Oh yeah.
I saw one game use that as like a timer. I think like the important thing of it is, does the object and the physicality of it match the feeling of the game? Because if you're doing something that's tactile and matches it, it adds an extra dimension to the game that wouldn't be there if it's just the prompts written down. It's the same way like dice doesn't have the same effect as a tarot card does, even though everyone really likes dice and the feeling of rolling dice is really useful. They don't always necessarily have that, I don't know, the connotations kind of attached to it. A Jenga tower is going to fall, and tarot cards are going to give you an answer that you may not like, in the same way dice do, but with very different kind of physicality to it.
Mm-hmm. And the physicality is another like very interesting aspect when we talk about like dice or any kind of element like this. And like from the video game standpoint, we've seen games that use like either like simulated physics or like arcade physics for their dice rolls and stuff like that. And the unpredictability of that is always like one of the tougher aspects, I think, to get right for like any kind of game. And I was just like having this conversation the other day, like when we talk about like dice rolls and stuff like that, I am inherently unlucky with them in every time I play games like this. And again, you'll have someone who they'll just roll, perfect 12s, or they'll get everything exactly right. And with like from a tabletop perspective, in terms of I guess like randomness or unpredictability in that respect, what are your thoughts, or like what's your approach to like how they should like impact your game?
It's the thing of true random never feels random. It's the reason why Spotify doesn't give you a pure random shuffle, because people had that, and then they would get the same artist 3 times in a row, and they'd be like, "Well, this is a bad shuffle." Like, no, it's just how pure shuffle will happen. It's the same reason my wizard character in D&D for the first 2 years of the campaign didn't roll above a 10. Just so unlucky with rolling, but only for that game, because in my game I run, I was getting natural 20s twice a session, and my players were getting into really bad trouble because every single enemy just had like insane luck for that round. It's why dice are quite interesting, because people attach a level of luck or kind of goodness or ability to their dice, but it doesn't. Nobody feels that for other mechanics. They haven't really grown to the hatred of it yet. Not hatred, but I think people have it with Jenga towers. A lot of people say like, "Oh, I'm bad at Jenga towers." And I'm like, what's probably just bad luck of how it's built, to be honest. But it is hard to match. If you want something to truly feel random, even though we all know the actual percentage chances of each dice and how many dice you're rolling, we know what the average roll is. We know what the like chance of rolling what you can do it quite. We have I think I have a spreadsheet somewhere of all of them, but it's never going to feel that way. And I think inherently people are going to either feel like they're having a very unfair time, or have a way too easy time and kind of it not feel as fun, which is a really hard thing to balance. And I think it just has to be matched by vibe. If they're having a very scary time, then lucking their way through it feels like a relief, and then that can be like that becomes part of the gameplay almost. But if they're having a very like it's a very cozy game, having the relief there is feels non-existent, and then the feeling of rolling badly just feels like it's not necessarily as cozy of a game, and that's where you get a lot of the cozy horror vibes come in. So yeah, I think it's just fighting it with vibes, really. I think if your game is pure like pure luck, just luck of the draw of playing, it's not going to feel as random as it would if you maybe throw in a mechanic like if you're rolling so badly so many times, then here's the consolation prize, or or vice versa. I think I had one game which was called Campfires and Vampires, a little vampire game where your stats change, and I made it so if your stats hit a certain point, if they get right to the top of the stats, they flip over and you go to the bottom again, and you then have to like fight with alternating stats for a while, and that can become very tricky. So there's ways of balancing it to balance out the feeling of bad luck and the feeling of good luck, which is.
And I saw a few of the games on your page are like journalism experiences. What's, I guess, like, for people who aren't familiar with that particular style, like, what are those games about?
Yeah, journaling games offer a chance to go so in depth into emotion and personality and stuff like trauma in a way that other games can't. And it's because you can, if you want to, you can make yourself go very open because you're the only one going to read the experience. So for a lot of games with the journaling, having it being a very specific experience that maybe not even most people can relate to, but some people will, and it fits very well into what they need.
Mm-hmm.
You can go really in depth into character, and it will relate to the person playing it. I have one game, actually, I've done it in a couple games now, where whilst they're journaling, like after the journaling part of the journaling game ends, the last thing they're supposed to do in the game is go back through and annotate what they've done and what their character went through, and connect it to who they are and what they went through, which can be very eye-opening to a lot of people who don't realize how much of themselves they've poured into a game that have like really affected them. It's why a lot of journaling games are so weirdly niche. Like one of my games is about like relationships that will never last and various things like things like that, which not everyone will necessarily click with, but enough will, and even if only 3 people do, it will click with them really well.
Mm-hmm. I was just thinking about, I did an interview with another tabletop designer. By the time this cast will probably be like a few months, but it'll be like a few weeks from this time as we're recording it. And he was working on like World War II style games, and like kind of you like chronicling your character's own exploits, from mission to mission. And like the personal aspect, as we've said, is oftentimes a major driver for like getting people like invested in these stories and games. Because again, there's a difference between you playing as a character that's been completely defined by the creator versus you building a character yourself. Again, it's part of the original appeal of D&D.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a character you can make in a group game where you're sharing the limelight with 3 or 4 other people. And then there's a character you can make when you're the only person with the spotlight on you. And if it's definitely down to the person creating the character, but you can put a lot more but a lot more energy into getting a very specific character set that you don't have to worry about stealing the light from other people. So I mean, that's not to say people can't do that with co-op games. Talking about World War II games, there's a podcast called Wing Women about Soviet air forces during World War II, the Night Witches.
Mm-hmm.
And the characters they're able to create in that game and how they're able to play them. You know, if there's like a comfortable group, you can make some of the best, most in-depth characters and explore some really interesting themes. And with a solo game, you can do that without the fear of that you're either taking the attention from other people who would want to do that, or kind of getting in the way of a story. Which the best tabletop groups, let their fellow players explore some of the best stuff and give them the space. But I know with a lot of people have a lot of stories of groups that don't fit that well, and solo games can be a very good way of focusing that energy.
Mm-hmm. And like as I said, like for myself, like from where I live, I never had like a local a comic book shop or any place I could go to like play like a tabletop game with like a group. So being able to experience these games solo is definitely an avenue for people like me.
Absolutely. There are some games that they've got like solo modes, so you can play them together, and then they've added instructions to getting as close to the original experience as you can with dice rolls and tables. And then there are games which are very, very different from the kind of TTRPG sphere like D&D, but still give you that journey and experience and kind of deep dive into a character you weren't expecting. And it's what I quite like about them, is because they're two very different game sets almost, and two very different experiences. So I find myself, even if though I have a couple of different tabletop groups, a couple of sessions every month of a solo game. Not nearly as much as I should, considering I write them. It's very helpful it's very cathartic, to be honest, doing both and getting both experiences.
And I'm looking at your itch page. I know there's a section that's titled SRDs. As someone who's not familiar with like tabletop definitions, what does SRG stand for?
Yeah,
SRD. I'm sorry.
SRD is a system reference document. So it's basically a system for making a game. Things like Forge in the Dark, which is the version for Blades in the Dark. It's basically the core mechanics of a game that is boiled down to allow you to add a game on top. So I've written 3 Dice Goblin, which is just a really chaotic game. The idea is you can roll infinite amounts of dice. It's a very very simple little game. I then I created a game called Everyone Deserves Shelter, which is a game about it's a journaling game where you play as a hermit crab trying to find a new shell. And it's still my favorite game I've ever made. I made a system called Crafted in a Shell, and that is the system for it. So people can come along, and they have as well. Some amazing games have come out of it, where people have made games based on that system, which is a very simple tarot card system that uses a character's journey and the people they meet in that journey to kind of tell the story of them.
With again like that challenge of like getting like the person, I guess, into like the mindset for playing these games. Has there been any like interesting challenges or stories? Because again, like with the different games that you have, they all have very different plots and very different tones to them.
Yeah, getting the tone down can be so difficult for some games. I've written games where I've had the idea for it to be one thing, and I've written it, and it's come off too whimsical or too much. A lot of the games I end up writing, and then like I've either put too much catharsis into it of the writing process. I have a game called We Are All One, or We Are Alone, depending on how you read it. And the core premise of the game is that you're basically climbing up a corporate ladder by any means necessary. But I'd recently been fired from a job. So as I was writing it, it came out as one of the most... It started off as just like a little bit of a whimsical, like, get your manager fired and take their job kind of satire, but, a bit like that. And then the way I actually wrote it was in the most, like, anti-capitalist, I'm ready to tear down the system, kill your bosses vibe, which I wasn't expecting, but the satire of it fits so perfectly. Including for the name, the "We Are Alone." The logo is a neon sign with one of the L's flickering, so you can never know which one it truly is. I think it's generally one of the best things I've ever written, even though the game itself is not very well made. But getting the tone down is so important, because if you get it wrong, people won't mesh with it as they should. If depending if the mechanics are really good, or that won't matter. If people are reading it and they're getting the wrong vibe from it, it will push them away from it. And I think tone and I was about to say aesthetic, but I'm thinking more the aesthetic of the vibe. That is so important. There's a game that came out recently called Mad as Hell, which has a phenomenal idea behind it of hunting demons, and the vibe of the game is so important to the makeup of it. Even though the actual system is really good, the idea of demons being created through misjustice, and to fight the demons, you have to use the tools of their misjustice against them. So you'll get things like, I think in the quick start, there's a demon which is, I think it's called a pipe leech, where it comes from contaminated water, and the way you fight it is through, using things that would clean the water to actually fight it, and making things safe for people. And literally using that to literally beat up the demon. Like, the vibe of the game is so important, because it just tells you exactly what you need to know about the game and make you go, yes, that needs to happen.
And as you're saying, with making sure the player is gelling or fitting with the vibe of the game is a very important aspect. As we're talking this, I'm writing my next book on cozy and wholesome games, and one of the challenges I said is that you have to be very mindful, as you were saying, in terms of the tone that your game is trying to deliver, because everyone will find different things cozy or wholesome. And if the audience is not meshing with that aesthetic, or any aesthetic that you're trying to make, it can lead to them really bouncing off of the game, even if they really enjoy the mechanics or the general gameplay.
Absolutely. With my Goblin Tea game, Grotty Gobbo's Tea Grotto, the name which I made as a joke, but it's now so long to actually say properly. I had a lot of people come back here saying, I didn't enjoy this. And the thing they didn't enjoy about it were the things that people were saying they liked about it. And the reason why they were is mainly because it's a very specific snapshot of cozy. It is, hanging out with goblins and brewing tea in a cauldron. It's a very specific cozy that not everyone sees as their cozy, which is absolutely fine. It was never, you never want a game to please everyone, as Kojima says. It has to. So some people's view of cozy very much goes against others in a way that doesn't invalidate them, which is very interesting. So when you're making a cozy experience, you have to. It's why so many people are fighting against farming sims now in the cozy space, because they're like, we've had cozy farming sims, we want cozy horror is becoming a thing now, and very different vibes of cozy are starting to get a lot bigger, which is quite an interesting thing of what is a snapshot of where we are at the moment and what communities are at, where things like Stardew Valley is extremely cozy, even though it's one of the most irritating games as soon as it gets to the fishing. I love Stardew. Yeah.
You are not the first person I've heard who say they're not a huge fan of the fishing.
I bet. It's yeah, I'm just going to decompress by going into the mines for a couple of hours of gameplay. I love it. But yeah, it's people have started. I've heard someone say the game Date Everything is a cozy game, and I get that. If that's your vibe, you're going to find that cozy, which I like it.
Yep. One thing I want to ask you about, looking at the different stories you have, a lot of them started out as game jams. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about kind of your time like in the game jam scene.
Yeah, I love game jams. They are such a nice way of bringing together people to make a game. Even if like a big community doesn't spawn out of it, it's just a nice little thing for people to come together and do. I started with the Justice Jam, a little game jam that popped up for charity, and I made Everyone Deserves Shelter for it. But it's just really nice to have like a couple of weeks or even one game jam. I had a day to do it, of just making a quick little game. It doesn't have to be fantastic. It can be an unpolished, unfinished. There's no judgment on not having it look pristine and publish ready. It's such a nice little thing to do. I really like running them, creating weird ideas and themes. I think I made one for the one called the Special Interest Jam, which the only rule, well, there's a few other rules, but the main rule, which was make a game that's inspired by whatever interest you could talk for like 2 hours in a presentation in. Like it doesn't matter what it is. It doesn't matter if it's a property you don't have the license to. Just make a unofficial game based on it. I made a game about Minone Cretes, 150 meters, and then a bunch of people made games on, just very different things I'd never thought. Someone made a game about rocks, and such a good time. And just a bunch of people coming together and making games that they probably never would have made if that theme wasn't presented to them. I made a game about a first date that looked like a menu for one called the Menu Jam. So what you order is like dictates what happens in that scene as you go through starter, drinks, lunch, and main course and desserts. And that kind of together tells you how well the date went. So yeah, a lot of very fun games that would never be made comes out of game jams, and some really big. I feel like big tabletop games get started as game jam ideas that then quickly spawn off into something a lot bigger when they have the time and resources to do it, and not just one rainy Sunday to quickly make a game.
Yeah. And yeah, as you just said, especially in the video game space, sometimes you just never know when an idea really resonates with people. And it can lead to some just very phenomenal titles being released.
It can, and for a lot of them too, they're a lot of game jams are about specific systems, and I've made a couple where for my game Pirouette, I made a system called the Standing Ovation SRD, and the idea is I made a game jam for people to make jams about different performances, because I thought that's what the only thing the system was good for. And then we had games about people giving speeches before a war. We had one that was like an argument where the argument you're trying to win this argument, but the anger can only last as long as your exhaustion doesn't catch up with you. And some really truly amazing games can come out of other people's minds that you just don't have access to. Like the way people see other things, like see things that you don't. It's amazing.
Now, I do want to talk about your kind of current project you're working on. But before we get to that, one thing that I want to ask you about in terms of designing your different tabletop games is kind of the end of them. This is a challenge I always ask a lot of indie developers. How do you, I guess, like figure out like what is the end point of the development for one of your stories?
As in,
it's like wrapping up development of it and like releasing.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of releasing, it really you have a couple of options, and it's always a difficult thing when you get to the end of a project and you're like, is this good enough to? Am I going to just drop this and be? Well, I mostly just drop my games online and make one post on Blue Sky and go have fun. But often, sometimes a couple of times I have gone, no, this needs to be bigger. So once you've finished the game, the end of development is marketing and trying to get it out there, which can be a horror show if you don't have the right kind of idea of what the game is in your mind yet. Obviously, you need to, for a very big game, it's very good to play test it and get other people to play your game, and that helps. But for smaller solo experiences, it can be very rough playing your own game, especially if you're creating it based on a vibe that's very personal to you. And getting other people to play it feels very weird because you're like, play this weirdly personal game. Get as emotional as you like, kind of thing. It's a very odd suggestion. So marketing can be quite fun with that, especially if it's a quite niche vibe, which solo games and indie TTRPGs tend to be, just to compete with the more widespread. I think for me, I am an overthinker entirely for finishing a game. I will either finish the game and be like, I don't want to think about it anymore, otherwise I will spend another week on this, and then just release it to be done, or I will do a full spreadsheet with every little thing that's left to do, how many weeks or days I have to mark it and everything, and then post it, or for a couple of times going in for a full like crowdfunding campaign if the opportunity is there as well. The knowing when to be like, I just have to let go of this and push it away can be difficult when you're not sure if the game is going to resonate with people, or I don't know a single designer that's looked at one of their own games and gone, this is perfect. They've usually fought against the idea that it's good until it's people have told them it definitely is.
Again, it is always that challenge of I can just polish it a little bit more, add just a little bit more to it, that we especially see from the video game side of things, that can lead to projects going like way over scope. And I guess that could be that's an interesting question I want to ask you about. When we talk about video games, there's always that idea of adding another system, another level, another mechanic that leads to games being overscoped in that respect. From the tabletop standpoint, is there like a similar like event or situation in terms of like overscoping in that respect?
Oh yeah. The urge to, especially for co-op games, the urge to throw in another adventure, another one shot, or a whole campaign module. Here is a full monster manual. I am fully. I've done this, and I am doing this currently, where like it's like I could release the game, or I could release the game with 30 different things they can include in the game, and here's an entire year-long campaign you can play. Like the urge to, the more you make for a game, the more successful it will be. And it's not like a perfect ramp up, but generally, if there are adventure modules, if people don't have to worry about creating their own one to even play the game, which can be quite a challenge for a lot of tabletop games, the more you work on the game and the more wide range of add-ons you make will increase the likelihood of someone playing it, but it will also make it look more professional and official. So trying to find the right balance of that. I know a lot of indie games do get just released as they are, and it's a matter of like, here it is now, and I will work on something, because you just don't have the resources or the funds to make something big. But for a lot of people, they do feel the need to add just a couple of extra things to entice people in. So it's not just the system, it's also you don't just have to play, here's everything you need to run it as well. And going just shy of rolling the dice for them.
And yeah, it's that same kind of mentality of, if I just add a little bit more to it, it will surely boost this game. I'll get hundreds of more sales, or even thousands. But as you're saying, it's that challenge of knowing when to end it, when it is at the state that you can say that it is done. That is oftentimes one of the hardest parts of game development.
Yeah, like I said, you can just keep tweaking the layout for as long as you want, but at some point you do just reach the point where you are moving things around, and the changes you're making aren't they aren't pushing it. They're not increasing the the
Mm-hmm.
greatness of the game. They're just shifting it around.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, for a lot of times, just you know, deadlines and set deadlines, but you need a game out for a specific time, or you're crowdfunding it, and you have to have something there ready to send out. So deadlines are helpful on that,
Mm-hmm.
I suppose.
Mm-hmm. And one more question I want to ask you, we're going to kind of talk more about like kind of like the Kickstarter side of things. When we look at like, from my own perspective, looking at like indie game dev and the indie scene, I can chart like how trends have changed in the past like 5 to 7 years. I want to ask you, like, from your own perspective, looking and of course designing tabletop games, has there been any like major like trends or shifts in terms of like, I guess, like the approach, or like, I guess, like people wanting different aspects of tabletop RPGs to like when you started to where we're at now?
I mean, yeah, like I said, in terms of almost every single big crowdfunding platform now has an event each year.
Mhm.
So Tabletop Nonstop for Crowdfunder and Zine Month and all of this, where I think Pocketpedia is the new one for BackerKit, where they are specifically focused on tabletop games. So you see usually at the beginning of the year, you'll see this huge burst of crowdfunding pop up where people have created a game, usually held onto them for a while to release them at this time. So you do see quite a big burst of new games coming out then, being marketed around then, and then kind of not as much throughout the rest of the year. Usually they're smaller games around then, but a lot more bigger games have decided that that's a good time as well. So it is a proper arena of going in. I know with Pirouettes, I did that at the beginning of the year. I crowdfunded it, and it was the busiest time for most expensive couple of months in the tabletop community I've ever had, because so many good things came out all at once. And there was a game by Seb Pines about like caving, and one where you're hunting monsters, and like so many good games popped up. There was a whole anthology box set called Ghast that kickstarted around that, just after that. So many amazing things pop up around the same time each year, and that's becoming such a big trend now because everyone is go, because you basically get free marketing at that point around there. So it's amazing, and the entire tabletop kind of indie community are, especially on Blue Sky, very very ready to boost everyone and support everyone as they can. So there is a big circle of money
Mm-hmm.
and funding around that time, which is quite nice to see.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting you mentioned like having like these like yearly events or yearly festivals, because we've seen that really grown in the indie game dev space in the past like 5 to 7 years as well. With Next Fest, and then we have like smaller developer Maya festivals now happening almost like every 2 to 3 months now. It seems on Steam.
Yeah, it's quite a nice thing to see. I think because there's so many new crowdfunding platforms popping up, you do have that bit of competition where they're all trying to fight for the tabletop projects. But it's nice to see a lot of people who wouldn't have crowdfunded the project they're working on actually doing it. So you get a lot more smaller games with much higher production quality, and they would still be fantastic, without it. But you also then get guest writers and stretch goal writers and artists come in as well. So a lot more artists and content creators getting a boost as well, which is quite nice to see.
Mm-hmm. All right. So before we talk a little bit more about kind of like Kickstarter and crowdfunding side of things, anything else regarding the design of tabletop RPGs, the mechanics, whatever that we haven't touched on that you would like to bring up?
Not I can think of. I think we've covered a good amount. I mean, obviously, there's a lot to talk about with
Mhm.
um, getting everything correct, and artwork and various things like that. But I think, yeah, I think we've covered quite a good amount.
All right. So for the next few minutes, I want to talk a little bit more about kind of the challenges of crowdfunding, and then we'll discuss what you're currently working on, and then we'll wrap things up for our conversation. So One of the biggest aspects that happened with indie dev over the 2010s was, of course, the rise of crowdfunding. And when we look at kind of the board game side of things, board games and Kickstarter or crowdfunding have gone very well together. We have seen some just impressive Kickstarter campaigns in that respect. From the kind of tabletop RPG side, what has it been like, I guess, like creating like the Kickstarter pitch or using crowdfunding to develop these games?
Yeah, I mean, so I've crowdfunded 2 games, and for each of them, especially around Tabletop Nonstop, having a platform for crowdfunding almost boosts the interest in the game more than anything, and it's really helpful because with both games, I'm a solo developer. I don't have any artistic ability really, so being able to get people in for you know bonus writing and drawings and artwork and layout design is really useful, but also just helps elevate the games beyond what I could do myself, which is really nice to see. It helps actually bring a vision to life rather than a few of my earlier games, which were more just very quickly wrap something in. But having that funding, even if you're not raising much, just a little bit of money goes so far for publishing your own game and getting it out there, especially for physical copies, because if you've not got the funding for printing, you're not going to bother with it really, unless you can make it yourself and print it yourself. So for bigger games, the only option is basically to have a crowdfunding campaign going, even if for only a couple £100 to get that printing going. The other option is making very tiny games from print at home. I think I've got one here, but you can print one at home and fold it in a weird way to make a wonderful tiny game. I have there. But if you want an actual physical book to have in your hand of your work, you've just got to get it out there and get funding that way.
And with, I guess, like setting up like the plans for a Kickstarter campaign or crowdfunding campaign, how long do you typically like plan things out before you like go onto the platform?
If you want it to be really successful, months. It has to be months in advance of letting people know and building up those numbers. For smaller games, we don't need much in terms of funding. You can kind of 1 or 2 months before is fine, but you have to have that couple of months of marketing and straight just telling people about your game to near annoying levels, at least as it felt for me doing it. I think for smaller games it's nice because you don't need as much to raise as much. You don't need to worry about getting the entire of Reddit or Facebook TTRPG groups on your side. But if you have like a bigger game, especially for board games and like the really big tabletop games that get released, you need tens of thousands to make it properly, and a good chunk of that is just printing. So you need as many people as possible. So you really, if you want to do a really good campaign, you need at least a year in advance to really get the name out there.
I mean, like from the indie game side of things, usually I see like 6 months to a year seems to be like kind of like a good standard for like planning out a Kickstarter.
Oh yeah. I think honestly 3 months is the bare minimum, and unless you have a following already, you'll find that you won't reach the numbers you kind of desire. But if you have so I think a year is a really good, above average almost of getting out there, and 6 months is probably a good ramping. But if you have like a following and an email list and a presence on as many social medias as you can handle being on, you can probably get a campaign running in 3 months in pure luck.
In terms of like, it's like either like stretch goals or like special rewards for crowdfunding. Are there any that, I guess, like, are appealing in the tabletop space?
So a lot of people do guest writers. A lot of indie tabletop games, you're advertising to other indie tabletop designers and trying to get them to. A lot of it is getting out to people who also make games and get them to shout out to their following as well. So if you're inviting people on to write will help get people more inspired to the project, especially if you're smaller than them, if they know they're writing a bit better. But also guests like artists is a big one, because some of the most like underrated tabletop artists are just phenomenal at what they do, and bringing someone on that people know is like a fantastic artist, they'll know that product is like 10 times improved. So artists and layout designers, and one thing that I think not many people do, and it's a shame because it's amazing, but soundtracks, like music designers and composers, that's the word. Composers, such a good idea. It's such an underrated thing. A lot of people will look at a composer and on the list of stretch goals and really want that to succeed. I had one for Pirouette. I had a composer called Muse, fantastic composer, Muse and Lestrata. Unfortunately, it didn't reach that stretch goal, but I could tell from adding them on that was a big draw, which was really nice to see. And it is a shame we didn't get it. I was really hoping for at least a theme song for it.
Interesting about like having like more, I guess, like physicality or like more like elements added to these games as a popular way of, I guess, like incentivizing people to donate.
Yeah, it's quite a nice thing you can do to just keep that hype going as well. Having even if it's just the printing is nicer. I know a couple do the you can get the book, and then if you hit a certain point, everyone gets the hardback instead, or they get like a nice gold foiling on the cover. Just having that and being like, oh, we've hit this goal, we can do this now, was really nice for people to see. I think it adds a kind of like a collective goal in mind where everyone feels like they've done a lot more. Obviously, funding is everything, and it's amazing, but it's a nicer way of looking at it than just big number go up, which is what a couple of crowdfunding campaigns can feel like, especially the really big ones that there's at least one every year. The really big ones that kind of just get loads of money very quickly and never had the facility in place for that boost.
And I guess as a kind of question, it's maybe a good lead in for our final section. For, I guess, like the timeline that you tell people for like the Kickstarter and the crowdfunding side, what is, I guess, like a standard? Is there like a standard time frame for kind of developing and releasing one of your tabletop games?
For me, it depends on how I'm feeling and how caffeinated I can be in any given week. So for the smaller games, I've had a couple of games I wrote in a day, and then spent maybe a little bit longer, maybe another day decorating. But that's just the smaller, weirder games that I've released. Usually, some bigger ones I tend to. Like, I'm a very top-heavy designer. I will do a lot of the work in the first couple of days, and then spend a lot of time just tinkering and doing smaller things. So for a lot of my games, it's not a very big stretch time, but for some games it can be. The game I'm currently working on, I've been working on since maybe 2 years now, on and off. Full-time working on it, about collected about 8 months of just rewriting and perfecting, getting the writing perfect and getting the vibe of the game spot on, as well as then for proper games you need like playtesting time, and you don't just need yourself playtesting it, you need to get other people playing it, which you can add extra time on. So playtesting can take, for some of my smaller games, a couple of days, or maybe a month, just letting people play test while I do some other writing. But for like a proper game, if you're wanting to feel how a campaign feels in a game, you have to run a campaign for it, and that can take a while. Especially if it's a game that thrives on. I think someone was saying the other day about their game had a set start to finish, so they had to play the campaign all the way through to play test it, and they had to do that a couple of times with different people, and then get other people to play test it without them running it to see how they work with it. So that can take a while. And then if you have crowdfunded it, once the money has come in, you're then sending that money out and then waiting for other people to finish their sides of the game before you can send it to the printers. And it can take a long time for a fully fledged, well-made game to fully finish and come out. But with those games, you can tell how well they've been done as well, because the extra time always adds to actually a better product.
And with like kind of the Kickstarter or the crowdfunding side, for any developers who are listening to this, do you have any like general tips or advice in terms of like planning a crowdfunding campaign, going to Kickstarter, that kind of thing?
I think it's just shout the name out, tell as many people. You're not as obnoxious as you think as you are. Everyone feels like they're being obnoxious when they're doing that kind of marketing, but get the name out to literally everyone possible. If it's a more old school game, things like Facebook have a shockingly high still of people that will follow Kickstarters. If it's things like Tumblr is still quite active for it, Reddit quite active, so getting your name out to every single person you can find, and getting it spread. There's also a lot of different communities scattered around that will just try and help boost your game, and they'll do it for free because they just enjoy helping lift other people, which is always really helpful. And then Discords, as much as Discord can be quite hard to follow if it's a really big server, getting a couple of Discords that you can post in and talk about your process will really boost any kind of crowdfunding. Because the problem with getting a game out there isn't getting people to know how good your game's going to be. If people aren't talking about that game, about enjoying the game, then it's not going to be known as that. It's the thing of like, people are more likely to play a game their friend suggests them than a game that they're told by a developer is a perfect game for them. Which is why so many people still play D&D compared to other games. It's because it's got the presence out there, and as soon as you've got people playing your game, then the name of the game will spread very quickly.
And again, getting that word of mouth, of course, is the one of the more challenging aspects of this. And one thing I want to ask you about, kind of before we move on to our final topic, in terms of playtesting, we've, like, for people who listen to this podcast, we've talked at length about playtesting when it comes to video games, from simple ones to very complicated ones. From the tabletop standpoint of this, what is it like, I guess, doing playtesting for a tabletop RPG? And what are some things, I guess, like, are you like paying attention to or looking for when you have people playtest it?
Yeah, I mean, it can be weird running your own games for playtests, because it can be very. I mean, I personally, I suck at both compliments and criticism. I hate receiving both, so playtesting is very difficult for me personally. But I think the number one thing you're looking for is, are they having fun? Because it doesn't matter how technically well made the game is. If your players didn't have fun, that's a problem. I think, for me anyway, I always taking on feedback of whether a mechanic works or not. But if you get the feedback that they weren't enjoying it, that's where the problem really lies. So that's what I always look for. I look at parts in, especially if it's like a one shot you're running for a playtest. If there are parts in which people are going to be more, maybe there's a twist or parts that you think is supposed to be where people are going to be a little bit more heightened with it. That's where I'd really look at the people's faces, and if they've managed to forget that it's a playtest, you've won. Absolutely won. I know when I've playtested in the past, I did a couple recently, and for one playtest I got told and it was a one shot I really liked. It was for my most recent game, and I could tell that they weren't really having fun with it.
Mm-hmm.
And after that's like, they basically told me like the game, the one shot I was running didn't fit the game, and while they enjoyed the system, they didn't enjoy the vibe of the one shot. So I scrapped the one shot and tried another one, and it went really well. We had a lot of really fun, and it's that trying to get that vibe right and listening to when people say like the vibe here isn't right. That's really important.
And I guess with like doing any kind of like redesigns or things along those lines, that when we talk about things from the indie game dev standpoint, obviously the further into game development, the harder to make major redesigns or changes. From your own perspective and with your own games, have you ever had to do like a major rewrite or a major redesign? And if so, like how did that come to be?
Oh yeah, I do it all the time. The process of coming up with a game, in my eyes, is the most important thing. Is knowing when to scrap a system
Mm-hmm.
and then rework the entire thing. I did see someone mentioned the best type of fix to your game is a fix that fixes everything, because for most games where a problem lies, and you'll know where the problem is, you'll feel it, but when like multiple like problems come in, usually there is one fix that will basically solve every problem you have, and it's just a matter of finding that right one. And for a couple of games, that's been, that hits, and I go, oh, it's this. I need to do this. I need to change that, and then reworking an entire game system around it. Sometimes, as the game's been basically finished and having to go back and change it all, it can be a lot of work, but when it's a good rewrite, it's worth it, basically.
All right. So with that, I think for our final quick set of questions, let's talk about what your current project is. So for people listening, Michael's latest game is What Haunts Us. So could you talk a little bit about what that is?
Yes, What Haunts Us is a modern ghost hunting game where you investigate ghosts, try and help them move on, and the most important thing is surviving long enough doing that until your life as a ghost hunter catches up with you, and making sure that you finish your unfinished business, because if you die before doing that, you'll become the one thing you've dedicated your life to hunting. It is a game of investigation, kind of going in and trying to investigate, a haunted location, trying to figure out what kind of ghosts they are, and trying to basically solve the haunting. But the important thing is you're not just going in to fight ghosts, you need to go in and help the ghosts move on. So whether that's finishing their unfinished business, or if it's something you can't finish, whether that's because it's immoral from the start, or or just legitimately impossible because of time and various things like that, you have to find other ways to help the ghost move on, even tricking it sometimes.
And how long have you been working on this one for?
I believe I started the idea in about 3 years ago now. I came up with the idea, and then I worked on it for I think about 2 months, and then I put it on pause when working on another game, and then I picked it back up and then put it on pause again for another game. I come in waves for my game design. And then I recently picked it back up again with full intention to finish it, and I've fully redesigned it and restarted it. So the current wave of writing is probably since March, April, March.
Okay. And I guess with coming up with like the story for it, as you were talking about earlier with some of your other tabletop games, like you were always inspired by or something kind of motivated you to make it. So was there any like major motivation that went into What Haunts Us?
Yeah, it was weirdly a one-shot for D&D I wrote called Ghostly Indignation. And the one-shot idea was you're investigating it's a murder mystery in a haunted house. And as you're going through, you're dealing with the aggressions of the ghost. But the twist is the ghost isn't trying to attack you. She's leading you to all the clues you need to arrest the people that killed her. And I never really liked the resolution of the story that would come through in D&D. Being a game which is the mechanics are focused around combat, it kind of took away from the resolution of the one shot a bit. So I decided to write a system that would fit the vibe there that I was looking for, and it spawned off into something a lot bigger, into What Haunts Us.
And I guess in terms of like from a mechanic standpoint, anything like different or I guess like refined in this one compared to some of your other titles?
Oh yeah. So a lot of my games are solo, but the ones I have made that have been kind of co-op games, I've always fallen back to a couple of very specific dice types and mechanics. I'm a really big fan of shifting stats. So you don't just have this is my stat, this is what I am until I level up. How things that in the game, how you react to it will change. I previously wrote a game, I mentioned it before, called Campfires and Vampires, where your stats shift based on morality of actions, and your stats like human and monster, and it would shift between them as you played. And I really liked the idea of that shifting stat, but didn't like the kind of dual version of it. It didn't fit the game. So instead I turned it into a health bar almost. So you have free stats that now shift as you take damage. Your ability to basically, you're running around and you get hit by a rock thrown at you by a ghost. You're not going to be able to run as fast if you're trying to work with a twisted ankle. So you're slowly fighting through not just injuries, but mental drain, and even emotionally. There's the soul stat, which is your ability to connect with others, and the more kind of emotionally drained you become throughout, whether that's a ghost forcing particular emotions on you or possessing you, will drain slowly. I called it the Last Stand system because I kind of came up with the idea for it would be a very good arena game where it's just you against like 100 nameless villains trying to kill you. But the more damage you take, the worse you become at the game. And then I had a very similar rolling style for a previous game I made, but it never fit the game. So a lot of it has been like looking at mechanics I've done in the past and being like, that never fit because it never connected to the game, but it will connect to this game and it will work better here, and kind of cannibalizing my own ideas basically.
And I guess for people listening to us, anything else you want to mention about playing What Haunts Us, or what like makes it something worth checking out?
In terms of playing it, it's a really fun it's a really fun system that's very easy to learn, which is quite useful. But I've written, I believe, 36 different ghost types, each of which have their own kind of motives, or based on either why they stayed behind or how they act. So there's one, obviously we have the old, proper poltergeist and various things like that. But we also have the opposite. We have the outrageist, inspired by a joke in a Discord book. I can't remember which one, by Terry Pratchett. But the idea they stay behind for the ones they love trying to help them through their grief, but then get stuck behind and left behind when their family moves on. So there's a lot of, each ghost has their own very specifics to them, and the type of ghost they are is a indication of how to help them. So the basic structure of a game is you're learning who the ghost was, what they've become, why they're doing what they're doing, and then figuring out from there what the best way is to help that ghost. And I think it has a very nice framing of, you're not here to hunt ghosts as hunt makes it sound. You're here to help them, even if they're trying to throw things at you. You're not going to do much good trying to fight them. You're trying to, take them away from what they're currently doing. And it's a lot more of a free flow game where there isn't strict, this ghost has to be defeated by this way. There are some ghosts that lend themselves to certain things, but it is down to the player of how they want to deal with the ghost. We had one shot where they bound the ghost to a ring, and then rather than trying to do anything to the ghost while they've done that, they went out to the the ocean and chucked it in the middle of the ocean. And they were like, we hate this we hate this ghost. We're just going to throw them in the ocean, let them deal with what they're doing. So there's a lot of, and then the people that did that afterwards found their remains and did the whole ritual to separate them from the earth. There's very, you can play it how you want to play it, and I think that's a really nice thing for a game, which is becoming more common nowadays. I think more games are doing it, rather than this is the enemy, this is how you kill them, this is how you shouldn't, and this is how you can't, and this is the amount of times you have to hit them. It has a very more open, free flow structure to allow players to do what they like.
In terms of the length of playing, this is something that we haven't really touched on, I think, during this conversation. For creating, I guess, the length of an individual play experience, what is that like in terms of setting up the pacing and structure of one of your games?
I think it depends on the game. Obviously, each game has to have their own structure. There is a game style called play by the post, which is one person does one experience, passes it to the next, and that can take months, if not years. So if you need to get the balance right, because you don't want people to drift off playing if it's going to take too long. For Pirouette, I mean, that is a cool hour. You don't really get much past that. You don't survive longer than that. But things like Grotty Gobos, for example, will play for as long as you want to. Or there's a game I wrote called An Unabridged History of a Doomed Relationship. I'm not very good on names. Where two people are playing and they're both writing simultaneously, but you don't move on to the next part until the other person's finished. So that can take less than a couple of hours, or that can take weeks. It depends on. I think a lot of games allow a more free flow of that, which is quite nice. I know for a lot of co-op games, usually the judgment is 4 hours should always be the limit for a session. No session should really ever go, unless you're doing one of the old school war board games that can take absolute months to complete. So the campaign of North Africa, the thing that can take a good decade to finish if you do it properly. I think a lot of games are now looking at shorter sessions, and sessions that can fit within a couple of hours, if that. And for what answers, it depends on how quick the players are being that day. I mean, if it's a slow day, if they're tired or whatever, deductions might not hit as fast. So for a one shot, I ran with my Monday group that took 4 hours, and then I did the one shot with a group of friends recently, and they did it in 2. So it really depends on how quick they're coming to deductions, or how much role play they're fitting in. But for a lot of journaling experiences, I like a really tight game, couple of hours, not more than a day.
And I'm trying to think if there's anything else. I guess anything else regarding One Haunts Us that you would like to bring up before we start to wrap things up?
I've got a quick start up for people who want to check it out. They can experience what is essentially the very base version of the game. And then I'm also going to be releasing an expanded guide for very quick playing as well. More, but with every single ghost type and things like that. They're, depending on when this comes out, essentially, there may or may not already be some extra content ready for it to go. Because I'm going to be working on that quite soon. And I'll be doing quite a few fun things with other game makers. So there will be a few crossover one-shots coming out soon as well, which should be very fun.
I think with that, I am just about out of questions. I guess, do you have an estimated release date for What Haunts Us, or is that still very much up in the air?
Still very much in the air, yeah. I've been teasing a very specific date, but I don't think I'm gonna. I'm gonna push that under the rug. I think. I think to be honest, I probably think I'll be able to get it out before then as well, like a more like a finished state of it before then, because I very much underestimated my ability to write quicker. But I think I'm planning on doing a few other smaller games I have ideas for in the meantime before I fully finish it.
So I think with that, we can wrap things up for tonight. I guess, as I kind of like the final question before we get to the end, anything, like any final thoughts, any final design topics you want to mention about either What Haunts Us, tabletop RPGs, or just anything else?
I can't think of anything else.
All right. Well, Michael, it has been a pleasure hanging out with you my afternoon, your probably later evening at this point since we started. So, I guess to wrap things up, if people want to follow you, anything you want to mention social media-wise, website, Twitter, X, Blue, whatever.
Yes, you can basically find me on itch.io and Blue Sky, as well as Tumblr and Reddit and a few other places under Innocent Goblin or Innocent Goblin TTRPGs. And I'm on basically Blue Sky. The ones I use is basically Blue Sky and Itch, and that's it. So you'll find me on there.
Mm-hmm. All right. And do you have anything you'd like to say to any of your fans watching, or any final thoughts to take us out?
I think all I have left to say is thank you for having me. Yeah, to be fair, it's been a really fun chat.
Yeah, it has. It's always great to chat about tabletop games, because it's not a particular style that I'm familiar with, but it's always great to learn more about from the people who make them.
Yeah, I mean, I'm always down to spend a couple of hours chatting about tabletop design.
All right. Well, I think with that, we will wrap things up for our conversation. For the people listening to us record right now, you'll find a link to Michael's itch page down below, so be sure to check out the page and all those games. And as I said at the start, if you are a developer working on an upcoming game and project and want to come on the chat about, I'm always looking for guests, so please feel free to reach out to me any way that you can. Those you're watching us on YouTube, do all the YouTubing stuff, check out the books, Patrons, Discords, all that great stuff. And thank you again, Michael, for coming on, and best of luck with finishing What Haunts Us and whatever else you're going to be working on.
Thank you, and thank you for having me.
All right. So, for those of you watching, once again, be sure to come back for discussions on game design here and on game wisdom, where some of the art and science of games. Until next time, have a great night.